When the sky first changed, nobody understood what was happening. It started early in the morning, when the sun was still trying to rise through thin clouds. People walking to work stopped in the middle of the road. Some stood on their balconies. Others ran outside from their homes, pointing their phones upward. A low, humming sound moved through the air, something no one had ever heard before. Birds scattered from trees, flying in confused, uneven patterns. Even street dogs looked upward and barked without knowing why. At first, people thought it might be some rare weather phenomenon. Strange lights had appeared before, during storms or solar activity. But this was different. The shapes in the sky were too steady, too intentional, almost like they were watching. A few people whispered that it might be satellites, maybe some kind of government test, or even a harmless scientific experiment. Still, the uneasiness was there in everyone's chest, like a quiet warning that something was not right. And the shadows became clearer. Not sharp, but large, more like silhouettes hiding behind the clouds. The low sound grew deeper, vibrating in windows and even in people's bones. Someone shouted for everyone to calm down, but the voice trembled. People recorded everything, trying to capture proof of what they were seeing. Videos spread across the internet within minutes. The whole world watched the same strange shapes floating silently above cities and villages, deserts and forests. Many hoped the objects were harmless. Many hoped they would simply pass by. But hope was fragile that morning. A group of schoolchildren stood in their playground, staring upward instead of running around like they usually did. One boy asked his teacher if it was some kind of festival decoration in the sky. The teacher didn't know what to say. She simply placed a hand on his shoulder and kept looking up, trying her best not to show fear. In city centers, cars slowed to a stop. Drivers stepped out and stood beside strangers, talking quietly, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. News reporters rushed to rooftops and tallest buildings, broadcasting live footage of the dark forms. Scientists appeared on news channels, trying to give explanations, but even their faces showed confusion. Some suggested it could be an eclipse combined with atmospheric distortion. Others refused to guess until more data came in. Then the first sign appeared that told everyone this was not a natural event. The shadows began to move slow, controlled, deliberate. No wind pushed them. No clouds drifted around them. They moved as if they were deciding where to go. People watched with widened eyes as the shapes shifted in formation. The humming sound changed pitch, almost like a signal. Some people instinctively stepped backward. Others took out their phones again and kept recording. A few fell to their knees in fear or prayer. Nobody truly understood what was happening. But every single person felt the same thing in their chest. Earth was being approached by something foreign, something powerful, something that had not come for peace. It was not long before the world understood the truth. Messages began appearing on screens, glitches, static, signals that interrupted every broadcast, every device. Then a single symbol flashed, something no one recognized. It repeated again and again, as if announcing the arrival of the beings behind the shadows. They were not here to observe. They were here to take. Across the world, leaders tried to remain calm. They held long meetings, asked experts to explain what these shapes meant, and urged the public to stay indoors. But deep down, even they knew that this situation was beyond anything humanity had prepared for. These visitors had come from somewhere far beyond human understanding, and they believed Earth would be easy to dominate. In their eyes, humans were too divided, too emotional, too unorganized to stand against something powerful. They thought Earth was simply a resource waiting to be controlled. They had no fear, no hesitation, and absolutely no doubt in their superiority. Their confidence was so strong that their message to Earth, once decoded, was almost mocking. They described themselves as rulers of countless worlds, Conquerors who expected obedience the moment they arrived. But the human reaction was not what they predicted. People were scared. Yes. They were confused. Yes. But they were not willing to give up their home. Something inside every person, no matter their age or background, began to shift. People who had never spoken to each other before now stood shoulder to shoulder, watching the sky and asking the same question: what can we do to protect our world? At first, the unity was subtle. Neighbors who barely said hello to each other shared water and food. Shopkeepers opened their doors and gave shelter to anyone stuck outside. People checked on each other, making sure everyone was safe. Even strangers comforted one another without thinking twice. This human connection grew stronger by the hour. It wasn't organized or planned. It came naturally, born from a shared fear and a shared determination to survive whatever was coming. Communities began forming small groups, helping each other, sharing updates, and finding strength in cooperation. Meanwhile, across the world, scientists, researchers, and analysts noticed something unusual. The Earth itself seemed to react to the presence of the invaders. Seismic sensors picked up faint vibrations deep within the ground, far below normal levels. The oceans experienced tiny ripples of energy that moved in patterns impossible to explain with regular physics. Remote mountain regions, untouched for centuries, began showing strange light patterns at night. No one knew if these events were connected to the invaders or something else, something older. Some people whispered that Earth was waking up. At first, these were treated as superstition or fear-driven imagination. But with each passing hour, more unusual events surfaced. Birds gathered in strange formations. Animals changed their migration paths suddenly. Even trees in some regions seemed to sway without wind, as if responding to an unseen force. In a small hill town, several people reported hearing a deep, distant rumbling coming from beneath the ground. They assumed it was an earthquake, but sensors picked up nothing. In a remote desert, glowing lines appeared on the sand for a few seconds before fading. Scientists who reviewed the footage couldn't explain it. All of these events hinted at something hidden, something ancient, something that had been asleep for a long time. Back in the cities, the strange shapes in the sky slowly drifted lower. They were no longer just shadows. They had solid form now, massive and intimidating. The humming sound grew stronger, turning into a heavy pressure that made people cover their ears. Someone yelled that they were preparing to take control. People braced themselves. They didn't know what was coming next, but they felt they needed to stand together. Everyone suddenly realized that the Earth, the place they lived all their lives, the place they complained about, loved, ignored, respected, was not just soil and air. It was their home. And when something threatens a home, people defend it with everything they have. But no one expected that they weren't the only ones preparing. Deep beneath the forests, inside towering mountains, far below ocean trenches, something old stirred. Something that had watched over Earth long before humanity existed. Something connected to the planet's heartbeat itself. These ancient protectors had witnessed ages pass, civilizations rise and fall. They only awakened when the planet sensed a threat it could not face alone. Now, the threat had arrived. As the sky grew darker and the foreign shapes hovered above. Humanity unknowingly stood on the edge of a moment that would change everything. People felt fear, but they also felt unity. They stood together, waiting. They didn't know that beneath their feet, the Earth's protectors were opening their eyes for the first time in thousands of years, answering a silent call that had echoed through the planet's core. The invaders believed Earth was weak, but they were about to learn a truth that would shake them. This world was not defenseless. It was alive in ways they could never imagine, and the protectors they had awakened were ready to rise. The strange shadows had stayed in the sky longer than anyone expected. By the next day, The entire world had changed. Life no longer continued the way it once had. People woke up earlier than usual, not because they had somewhere to go, but because they simply couldn't sleep. The constant humming sound had settled into the air like an unwanted guest. Even at night, when cities normally grew quieter, the hum stayed. It was impossible to forget that something was floating above them. In many neighborhoods, people gathered outside their homes, forming small circles. Some held cups of tea or coffee, even though most cups remained untouched. There was no appetite for anything. People spoke in low voices, sharing what they had seen, what they feared, and what they hoped. But the truth was no one knew what would happen next. Government officials around the world tried to calm people, telling them to remain indoors, stay calm, and trust the authorities. But confidence was missing from their voices. Even they didn't fully understand the invaders or their intentions. Their best scientists worked nonstop, and still the answers were blurry. Internet discussion exploded. Some people believed the invaders were here to wipe out humanity. Others thought they might be explorers who had lost their way. A few insisted they were peaceful visitors who would eventually leave. But the signs told another story. The shapes in the sky did not drift randomly. They stayed exactly where they wanted to be, hovering over cities and regions that mattered most places with technology. Population or resources. The invaders seemed to be studying the planet deeply, looking for weaknesses, and humanity felt it. Stores closed early. Schools shut down completely. Streets became quieter, and people walked quickly, always glancing up. Even children, who normally found excitement in strange things, seemed unsettled. They stayed close to their parents and avoided looking at the sky. But while fear spread across every city, something else spread along with it: togetherness. People who had once argued over small things now stood shoulder to shoulder. Neighbors who barely exchanged greetings shared meals, shared blankets, shared information. Those with extra supplies offered them willingly to families who had none. People opened their garages and living rooms to strangers who couldn't go home. Even in cities known for their fast, independent lifestyles, humans became more united than ever before. One man living in an apartment building cooked a big pot of food and placed it on a table in the hallway. He didn't say a word. He didn't ask for thanks. People walking by simply took what they needed and left quiet nods or small smiles. Someone else in the building placed water bottles next to the food. Another person collected blankets and placed them on the stairway for anyone feeling cold. No one asked anyone else to help, yet everyone did. This natural unity spread across countries and continents at the same time. Scientists across the world started to notice something strange, a pattern in the unusual readings coming from deep within the earth. It first appeared in the mountains of Asia, a faint vibration that repeated in a rhythmic way, almost like a heartbeat. At first, they assumed it was a malfunction in the sensors. But when sensors in Africa, South America, and the Pacific also picked up similar vibrations, they realized something bigger was happening. The patterns were not random. They followed a sequence, one that repeated every few hours, growing slightly stronger each time. These signals were old, extremely old, older than any recorded geological activity. And they seemed to be reacting to the invaders' presence. In coastal towns, fishermen reported strange water movements. The waves behaved oddly, rising and falling in ways that did not match the tide. Some areas of the ocean glowed faintly at night, not from pollution or algae, but from something deep beneath the surface. Scientists tried to send underwater drones, but many of them malfunctioned before reaching the deeper layers. Something powerful was down there, something not recorded on any map. In a dense forest far from any city, a group of hikers felt the ground tremble beneath their feet. But instead of shaking like an earthquake, the ground pulsed gently, almost like it was breathing. They stood still, listening, feeling the earth move in a way they had never felt before. When they reported it to local authorities, at first no one believed them. But when the same report came from people 3 villages away, officials sent expert teams to investigate. They found nothing broken, no fault lines, no cracks, no landslides. The earth had simply trembled on its own. Deep below the desert, a long silent cave system lit up for the first time in centuries. Minerals inside the walls glowed softly, illuminating ancient carvings that no one alive had seen before. The light faded in minutes, but it was enough for a few travelers to capture blurry footage. All of these events confused scientists but terrified the invaders. The invaders, now fully visible in their metallic shapes, had expected to control Earth easily. Their technology was beyond anything humans had created. They carried devices capable of measuring gravitational fields, atmospheric textures, electromagnetic signatures. But something about Earth frightened them. Something old and powerful was responding to their presence. They did not show fear openly, but their movements became sharper, their formations tighter. They understood that Earth was not just a simple planet. It held secrets they had not calculated. And those secrets were awakening. Meanwhile, humans continued to cling to each other for strength. People formed small volunteer groups to help elders and families who lived alone. Even in neighborhoods where people didn't know the same language, they found ways to communicate through hand gestures, smiles, or simple notes written in multiple languages. One teenager in a crowded building walked door to door, asking if anyone needed water or medicine. Another young woman helped carry heavy bags for people who were too stressed to move on their own. These acts of kindness were small but powerful. They became proof that humans, despite their fears, refused to collapse. Social media, despite being filled with panic and speculation, also began to fill with heartwarming clips, people rescuing stray animals, families cooking together despite shortages, musicians playing calming tunes from balconies, hoping to ease their neighbors' anxiety. Even in the darkest moments, humans found ways to bring light, but the mysterious Earth signals grew stronger. In one lab, scientists watched as a map lit up with hundreds of dots from different continents, all showing the same vibration pattern at the same time. Something deep beneath them was awakening, slowly but steadily. And it wasn't just one thing. It was many things. Different regions had different signatures, as if several ancient forces were rising from long sleep. These forces were not responding to humans. They were responding to the invaders. And the invaders sensed it too. The shadows above cities stopped moving freely. Instead, they hovered in tight clusters, almost as if they were nervous. Their hum grew louder and more uneasy. Some people believed the invaders were preparing to leave. Others feared they were preparing for something worse. But the truth was simpler. The invaders were unsure of what they had triggered. Something old, something hidden, something deeply tied to the Earth's existence had begun to rise. By the time the sun set on the second day, the world felt like it was breathing differently. The air carried a strange tension, a silent promise that something powerful was coming. People could sense it in their bones, even if they didn't understand it. They felt the ground warmer in some places, cooler in others, as if the planet itself was shifting. Then, late in the night, when most people tried to rest, even though sleep felt impossible, a faint rumble rolled across several regions of the world. It wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It was deep, ancient, and purposeful, like the Earth, clearing its throat after thousands of years of silence. People woke up and looked around. Some stepped outside. Dogs barked. Birds flew from trees, even though it was dark, and far across the world, in remote mountains, deserts, jungles, and oceans, the protectors of the Earth began to awaken fully. Invaders had come believing Earth was easy to conquer. They had no idea they had just awakened the guardians that even ancient civilizations had only whispered about. For 2 days, people all over the world had watched the sky with fear and confusion. They had lived with the humming sound, the shadows, the strange behavior of animals, and the feeling that something ancient beneath the earth was slowly waking up. By the time the 3rd day arrived, most people had stopped trying to pretend everything was normal. Life simply wasn't normal anymore. The planet itself felt different, heavier, as if holding its breath. In a remote part of South America, where thick green forests stretched endlessly in every direction, a small research team sat inside a temporary base. Their camp was set up months earlier for a completely different purpose, to study seismic activity caused by underground caves. But now, the equipment in their camp was recording something no one had ever seen before. The youngest researcher stood in front of a screen that was flashing with strange wave patterns. "This signal isn't natural," she whispered. Her voice was quiet, but everyone heard her because the room had fallen silent minutes ago. The lines on the screen weren't random. They moved smoothly, almost rhythmically, forming patterns that repeated every few minutes. It looked like someone or something was trying to communicate. The team leader leaned closer, lowering his glasses. "It's coming from beneath the rainforest floor," he said, more to himself than to the others. He checked another device. "But the depth makes no sense. Nothing alive should exist that far down." No one argued. They knew he was right. Yet the readings continued. Outside the camp, the forest was strangely still. Birds perched on branches without moving. Monkeys hid silently, and even the insects seemed quieter than usual. It felt like the forest itself was holding its breath. Without warning, the ground vibrated that it wasn't like an earthquake. It didn't shake violently. It wasn't chaotic. Instead, it felt like a slow wave moving beneath the earth, as if something huge turned over in its sleep. The researchers stared at each other. The vibration rolled through the soil, the trees, the river nearby, and then disappeared as suddenly as it came. "It's responding again," the young researcher whispered. The team followed the readings into the forest, carrying equipment, cameras, and their own fear. Every step deeper into the trees felt like stepping into an ancient world untouched by time. Leaves rustled above them, but not because of wind. Something was stirring far below, and the forest could feel it. As they walked, the vibrations grew stronger, as though guiding them. After nearly an hour of careful movement through the dense jungle, they reached a hill covered in thick roots and moss. The readings pointed directly beneath it. "This is it," the team leader said softly, but no one knew what it was. They set up their instruments and waited, sweat running down their faces in the humid air. Their screens flickered with more patterns, now faster, stronger. The ground pulsed again, once, then twice, like a heartbeat. Then the hill moved. The soil shifted, sliding slowly as if pushed from below. Roots tore away from the earth. Stones rolled down the sides. The researchers stumbled backward, shaking, unsure whether to run or stay. One held up a camera with trembling hands. Another grabbed the young researcher's arm to keep her from falling. A deep, low sound rose from the ground. It wasn't frightening. It wasn't threatening. It was ancient, powerful, and strangely familiar, like a voice carried through the earth. The top of the hill cracked open. Light spilled out, soft at first, then bright enough to make the researchers cover their eyes. The light wasn't harsh. It felt warm, almost comforting, as if welcoming them. When their eyes adjusted, they saw it, a massive structure hidden under the earth, buried for what must have been thousands of years. It wasn't metal. It wasn't stone. It looked like something in between, with patterns carved across its surface. The carvings glowed faintly, pulsing with the same rhythm as the seismic signals. the young researcher whispered. "It's alive." Before anyone could respond, the glowing lines shot upward into the sky like a beam made of pure energy. Not destructive, not violent, just powerful. The beam shot straight through the clouds, sending the birds flying in circles. The hum that had been filling the air since the invaders arrived suddenly wavered. Something above reacted. High over the rainforest, one of the foreign shapes jerked backward. It tilted as if pushed by an invisible force. The beam from the structure didn't touch it directly, yet the invader moved as though facing resistance it had never felt before. The researchers watched, unable to believe their eyes. "What is happening?" Someone breathed. The team leader didn't answer. His eyes were locked upward, reflecting the bright beam. The Earth? It's defending itself. The foreign shape tried to stabilize but failed. It drifted further away, retreating from the area above the rainforest. The beam held steady for several long moments before dimming, then fading back into the structure. The carvings on the surface glowed softer, like a heartbeat slowing down again. For the first time in days, the humming in the sky decreased only in that region, but noticeable enough that everyone felt it. The forest animals slowly came back to life, their cries returning in cautious waves. Leaves rustled naturally again. The air felt lighter. The researchers stood in stunned silence. One of them whispered, "We need to record everything." But even as they said it, they understood that footage and readings could never capture the true feeling of what they had witnessed. Across the world. Similar awakenings began. In a desert on the other side of the planet. Ancient dunes trembled as something buried deep beneath the sand stirred. A strange pattern formed across the ground, glowing like molten lines. People in nearby villages saw the lights and ran outside in awe and fear. In the middle of an ocean trench, a burst of energy rose through the water, creating a glowing column that could be seen from miles away. Fishermen felt their boats lift slightly as the water moved beneath them. In a frozen mountain range, snow shifted in a circular pattern. A hidden doorway, covered for centuries, opened to reveal another ancient structure similar to the one found in the rainforest. These weren't machines. They weren't buildings. They were guardians old as the Earth itself. Humans had forgotten them, but the Earth had not. News of the awakening spread quickly. People watched videos with jaws wide open, unable to believe their planet held such secrets. The internet went wild. Scientists worked nonstop. Spiritual leaders claimed this was a sign. Every person felt something inside them shift, fear mixed with hope. The invaders, however, were not calm. Their movements in the sky changed completely. They tightened their formations, moving with a jittery sharpness they hadn't shown before. They scanned the Earth repeatedly, trying to understand what was awakening beneath their feet. They had expected humans to panic. They had expected Earth to surrender. Instead, the planet itself had responded. And it responded with power. Back in the rainforest, the research team remained near the structure, watching as the carvings slowly faded back to a dim glow. They didn't want to leave, even though they were frightened. They felt safer near the ancient structure than anywhere else. It was as if the Earth had wrapped an invisible shield around them. The team leader finally spoke, his voice soft. "It didn't attack us. It didn't harm us. It only reacted to them." "Why now?" someone asked. "Because they crossed a line," the young researcher said. "They woke something that had been protecting this planet long before humans existed." And she was right. The invaders had come believing they were the strongest beings present. But they had miscalculated something massive. They had disturbed the guardians that ancient civilizations had once spoken about in myths and legends, beings not made of flesh, not built like machines, but shaped by the planet itself. as night fell. The structure beneath the rainforest glowed faintly like a sleeping giant breathing slowly. The researchers sat around their camp with lanterns, speaking softly. They knew this was only the beginning. If one protector had awakened, then others would too. And when all the protectors rose, the invaders would face a truth they had never expected, that Earth was not just a planet to conquer. It was a living world with ancient defenders. Soon, the whole world would witness that truth. For days, people around the world had been living under the shadows in the sky. But after the first protector awakened in the rainforest, something shifted, not only on Earth, but also in the invaders' behavior. Ordinary people didn't understand the science behind what was happening underground, but they could feel the change. The humming sound that had bothered everyone from the first day now came and went in uneven bursts. Almost like the invaders were confused, and they were. For the first time since they arrived, the shapes in the sky didn't move with confidence. They moved cautiously, as if something had startled them. Their long, straight formations now broke apart more often. Their bright surfaces flickered now and then. They scanned the ground repeatedly, but the results they received only made them more uneasy. They had come expecting a silent, powerless planet. Instead, they had awakened something they didn't understand. Across the world, humans watched these changes closely. People who had been terrified from the moment the shadows appeared now felt a small but important shift inside their hearts. Hope. Uncertain hope, fragile hope, but still hope. Even children sensed it. Some kids asked their parents, "Why are the shadows moving weirdly now?" Parents didn't know the answers, but they hugged their children and said, "Everything will be okay." And for the first time, they almost believed their own words. In many towns and villages, people gathered outdoors at night, looking up at the sky together. Conversations turned from fear to curiosity. They whispered about the glowing lights coming from the ocean, the trembling mountains, the strange movements in deserts, and the ancient structures rising from the earth. People shared videos and photos they found online. Some showed glowing symbols. Others showed old carvings no one recognized. All of them pointed to the same truth. The earth was waking up. Meanwhile, governments across the world struggled to make sense of everything. Scientists from different nations began working together, sharing data instead of hiding it. Time zones didn't matter anymore. Researchers who had never spoken before were suddenly sharing screens, sending files, asking questions, and offering theories throughout the night. A scientist from one country said, "The vibrations are not geological. These patterns are intentional." Another responded, "We think the guardians are communicating with each other through the Earth's core." Someone else added in disbelief, "But that shouldn't be possible. Nothing on this planet can send signals that deep." Yet something was doing exactly that. But even though the scientists were working nonstop to understand the Earth's protectors, ordinary people became just as important. Communities kept helping each other. They kept each other calm. They shared food, water, news, and encouragement. Toward evening, some people in crowded apartments even played old songs from their childhood on speakers to lift the mood of the entire building. A man from a small neighborhood cooked extra meals every day and handed them to families who lived alone. Someone else cleaned the streets so children could play for a few minutes without fear. And every time someone helped a stranger, the feeling spread. It reminded people that even in darkness, humans could still shine. But the invaders did not feel that warmth. They felt the opposite fear. High above the mountains, one of the foreign shapes flickered nervously. Its smooth exterior glowed brighter than usual, as if trying to protect itself. Another shape drifted away from an area near a coastline, where the ocean had turned an unnatural shade of blue earlier that afternoon. Inside their crafts, hidden from human eyes, The invaders quietly adjusted their scanners and ran emergency calculations. They had detected energy forces they had never encountered before. These forces didn't match any known species, any known technology, or any expected planetary defense. This planet was defending itself, and the protectors weren't machines that could be shut down. They weren't creatures that could be frightened away. They were woven into Earth's core, its land, its oceans, its air. They belonged to the planet in a way nothing else did. Humans couldn't see all of this clearly, but they could sense it. People felt the air shifting and the ground pulsing at times. They felt the strange warmth, the faint glow spreading through unexpected places. Late one evening, in a quiet mountain village, an elderly woman walked outside her home because the floor beneath her feet felt warm. Not hot, not dangerous, just warm, almost like the earth was whispering under her soles. She stepped onto the grass, looked at the sky, and said softly, "You woke something ancient." She didn't know how right she was. In the same mountains deep, inside caves untouched for centuries, a large stone wall trembled. Dust drifted to the ground. The carvings on the wall began to glow, lighting up the cavern with a soft gold color. Travelers who were camping nearby saw the light bounce off the mountainside. They froze, staring at the glowing cracks forming on the wall of the cave. Then, like a slow heartbeat, the ground pulsed again. Far from the mountains, across the ocean, the rainforest protector was still active in subtle ways. Its carvings remained warm. Its glowing lines pulsed every few minutes. The research team who had discovered it stayed near the site, sleeping in shifts, recording every change. Even though they were frightened, they felt strangely safe. It was as if the guardian could sense their presence and accepted them. One evening, while the researchers sat quietly near the glowing structure, something unexpected happened. The protector responded again. A soft, low sound rolled from deep inside the structure. The air changed around them, becoming calmer, denser, almost peaceful. The researchers glanced at each other. The young researcher placed her hand gently on the structure. It didn't shock her. Instead, she felt a slow, steady pulse beneath her fingers. "It's like a heartbeat," she whispered. Her voice trembled not from fear, but from wonder. Around the world, similar stories were happening. In a desert, a group of travelers heard soft humming beneath their feet. When they looked across the sand, they saw faint, glowing patterns appearing for a few seconds before fading. In the ocean, divers near a reef felt warm currents rise from the deep water. A large shadow moved beneath them, but not in a threatening way. It felt more like a guardian rising from its ancient home. In a snowy region, a group of hikers saw bright blue lines appear across the ice. The lights traveled slowly, tracing ancient shapes no one had ever seen before. Every sign from the earth meant one thing: the protectors were talking to each other, and the invaders could hear these signals. Was what scared them most. They did not speak human languages, but they communicated through frequencies. And these new signals were older, stronger, and more complex than anything they could decode. They tried to block the signals. They failed. They tried to analyze them. They got nothing. They tried to silence them. The moment they attempted that, one of the protectors responded with a wave of energy that forced an invader craft to shift away sharply, as though pushed by invisible hands. People watching from the ground gasped, some cheering without even knowing why. The invaders had never been challenged before, not like this, and certainly not by a planet they thought was weak. Back in the forests, cities, mountains, and coastlines, humanity watched these signs with growing courage. The fear in their hearts didn't vanish completely, but hope was slowly replacing it. They believed the protectors were rising not for destruction, but for defense. One night, a young boy looking out of his window asked his parent, "Does the earth love us?" The parent hugged him gently and answered, "Yes, and it's showing us right now." The protectors continued to awaken across the planet, each with its own glow, rhythm, and ancient power. They weren't rising to take over the world. They were rising because the world needed them. Humans weren't alone anymore, and for the first time since the invaders arrived, the universe suddenly felt like a place where Earth wasn't helpless. The invaders stared down at a planet they know, longer understood that the protectors stared back from beneath mountains. Oceans, forests, and deserts, calm, ancient, unbothered. The balance of power was shifting dot, and the world was only at the beginning of what was coming next. When the fifth awakening began, people all around the world felt it before they saw anything. It started quietly, as if the air itself was holding its breath. The world had already experienced strange signs during the earlier awakenings, but this time something was different. The sky carried a strange glow, not bright enough to scare anyone, but strong enough to make hearts beat a little faster. Everyone was already tired of worrying, tired of guessing, tired of pretending they understood what was happening. But at the same time, people were more united than they had ever been. They had seen how the protectors acted earlier. They had seen how the mysterious forces worked with precision, keeping humans safe while pushing the invaders back. So now, instead of fear, people waited with a kind of calm curiosity. Something big was coming, and deep inside, many felt it might be good dot in a small coastal town. A group of people gathered near the shore. The waves were quiet, yet the sea looked like it was lit from below. Children pointed at the water, whispering to each other. Adults stood behind them, watching carefully, unsure whether they should move back or stay. The ocean had always been beautiful, but on this day, it felt almost alive in a new way. The ground under their feet vibrated gently, not in a dangerous way, just enough for people to feel that something beneath them was awakening. A low hum filled the air. It was soft, almost musical, and felt like the sound was speaking directly to the hearts of everyone present. Not at first. No one knew where the light was coming from. It looked like it was rising from deep under the ocean. People stepped closer, drawn to it, even though they didn't fully understand what they were witnessing. A fisherman in the crowd whispered that it looked like the sea was opening its eyes. Someone laughed nervously, but no one argued, because the description felt strangely accurate. Slowly, the water began to swirl, but it didn't rise violently. Instead, it moved like a gentle whirlpool forming its center. The glow inside it grew brighter, and soon a huge faint shape became visible inside the spinning water. People gasped, but no one backed away because the presence didn't feel threatening. It felt protective, warm, almost familiar. And then the ocean released it. The rising figure was not a creature, not a machine, not anything humans had language for. It looked like it was made of the sea itself, shifting, flowing, yet standing tall, like a mountain made of light. Its shape wasn't sharp or frightening. It was graceful and steady, like a guardian stepping out of a long sleep. Everyone on the shore felt a wave of calm wash over them. Some felt their eyes burn with tears they didn't understand. Others whispered prayers. A few simply stood frozen, unable to look away. One thing was clear to all of them. This was a protector, another one of the ancient forces awakened by the invaders' arrival. Far from the coast, people across the world watched similar scenes unfold. In snowy regions, glowing shapes rose from ice. In deserts, the sand lifted in patterned spirals. In forests, the trees leaned as if bowing to something emerging from the earth. Each place had its own awakening, but all of them shared the same gentle, comforting energy. These protectors didn't arrive to cause destruction. They arrived to restore balance. Meanwhile, the invaders felt this shift more painfully than anyone else. Their technology began malfunctioning. Their ships trembled. Their patterns of movement became reckless and confused. They tried to understand what was happening, but they had no way to measure or calculate the energy that was sweeping through the earth. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't electrical. It wasn't scientific in the way they understood. It felt like the world itself was refusing them. On the ground, groups of humans coordinated with one another. Not with weapons, not with force, but by guiding people to safe places and supporting areas where awakenings were happening. Scientists observed the events with awe, writing down everything even though they knew no words could ever describe it properly. Elders who had spent their lives studying stories and legends felt their hearts beat with recognition. They whispered to others that the earth had always been alive in ways everyone had forgotten. A team of researchers in an old mountain observatory worked day and night to understand the patterns of these awakenings. They noticed that the protectors appeared in places where old cultures had once made symbols or stories about guardians of nature. They realized that the protectors had always been there, resting silently beneath the world, waiting for a moment when the earth truly needed them. One researcher said quietly that maybe humans had grown too used to thinking they were alone, or that Earth was just a planet with resources. Now they were learning that the world had its own ways of defending itself, ways that awakened only when humans themselves showed unity and hope instead of fear. The protectors didn't speak, but they communicated through light, movement, and calm energy. People watching them felt small but safe, like children standing close to someone who would never let anything harm them. This feeling spread far beyond the places where the awakenings happened. It reached cities, villages, and remote regions. People who had been arguing or panicking before now held hands and waited together. It was as if the protectors were not only awakening the earth, but also awakening the goodness in people. Back by the ocean, the enormous protector lifted its glowing form and pointed toward the sky. A beam of light shot up, calm and steady. It didn't explode or attack. It simply rose like a signal. Moments later, protectors in other parts of the world did the same. Beams of light crossed the sky like threads, forming a net around the planet. They weren't harmful, they were shields, forming a protective layer that calmed the atmosphere itself. Birds flew calmly under the newly formed glow. The air felt warmer and easier to breathe. The wind softened, as if the planet had taken a deep breath and finally felt comfort again. The ocean waves became gentle, moving in slow patterns like they were dancing with the glowing figures standing above them in major cities. People watched the sky in silence. Some smiled through tears. Some sat on rooftops just to feel the warmth of the light on their skin. Many whispered that they couldn't remember the last time the world felt so peaceful, even in the middle of chaos. Even the invaders, with all their arrogance and advanced technology, were stunned by what they saw. Their calculations failed. Their plans collapsed. Their ships wavered in confusion, unable to match the calm, ancient force protecting the planet. For the first time since arriving, they hesitated. The protectors didn't chase them. They didn't strike them. They simply made it clear that Earth was not meant to be taken, not meant to be claimed. It was a home with a spirit of its own, a world that awakened gentle power only when pushed to its limits. Humans everywhere understood this message clearly. The protectors weren't saving Earth alone. They were responding to the unity humans had shown. People had learned to trust each other, help each other, and stand together even in fear. That energy had reached deep into the planet, calling the protectors back from their rest as the beams continued glowing in the sky. People realized they were seeing something that would stay in history forever, an event not just about survival, but about understanding Earth in a new way. The protectors weren't here to rule. They were here to remind humans that the planet is alive. Remind invaders that arrogance has limits. remind everyone that unity can wake forces far older and wiser than anyone imagined. And slowly, in the calm glow of the fifth awakening, humanity felt something they had been missing for a long time: hope. A simple, strong hope that maybe the world was healing, and they were healing with it. When the final awakening began, the world was already filled with a strange calm. Not peaceful, exactly. There was still tension in the air, still a sense that something huge was about to happen. But people were no longer terrified. They were alert, thoughtful, almost hopeful. They had seen the protectors rise one by one, and each awakening had changed something inside them. Families sat together in open places, holding hands, looking up at the sky. Communities gathered in fields, rooftops, beaches, and parks. It felt like everyone had silently agreed to witness whatever came next. They didn't want to hide anymore. They didn't want to watch from behind closed doors. They wanted to be present for this final moment. Across the planet, the air grew warmer, then cooler, then perfectly still. It was the kind of stillness that made people look around and whisper, as if afraid to speak too loudly. Birds stopped in mid-flight for a moment, gliding silently on the air. Trees didn't sway. Even the waves paused before reaching the shore. It felt like the world was waiting high in the mountains. An old observatory filled with scientists, elders, students, and ordinary people began to shake with a soft vibration. Not strong enough to break anything, just strong enough to be felt in the bones. A young student placed a hand on the wall and said quietly that the mountain felt alive. Deep beneath that mountain, something ancient was waking up. In earlier awakenings, the protectors had risen from oceans, deserts, forests, and ice. But the last one, this final force, was hidden in the oldest layer of the earth, older than human memory, older than stories, older even than the invaders could imagine. People began gathering near the base of the mountain without being told to. News spread quickly, not through fear, but through a strange, shared instinct. It was as if the world itself was whispering, "Come witness this." All around the mountain's base, thousands of people stood quietly, watching as faint cracks of light appeared between the rocks. At first, the light was soft, like sunlight peeking through curtains. But then it grew brighter, deeper, almost golden. People shielded their eyes, but none turned away. A soft, rising hum echoed across the valley, gentle, steady, and strangely soothing. It didn't feel like sound. It felt like energy, like a heartbeat rising from the ground beneath their feet. Then, the mountain split not violently, but gracefully, like a giant opening its eyes after a long sleep. A massive shape rose from within, but it didn't burst upward quickly. It rose slowly, as if stretching after being still for ages. The light around it wrapped the figure like a soft cloak. It wasn't a creature or machine. It was something beyond those simple words, something that looked carved from the mountain itself, yet glowing with a living warmth. People stepped back without thinking, overwhelmed by its size. But they weren't scared. The energy it gave off was calm and protective. Just like the earlier guardians, this figure was different. Though it felt older, wiser, stronger. An incredibly gentle towered high above the valley, but it bent slightly forward, as if inspecting the people gathered below. The light around its form didn't burn or blind. It glowed softly, making the mountain, trees, and even the clouds look touched by gold. Every person watching felt something in their hearts shift. Some felt peaceful. Some felt emotional. Some felt suddenly brave. A man in the crowd whispered that he hadn't felt this safe in years. A woman quietly said it felt like the earth was giving them a hug after a long storm. Across the world, the other protectors responded to the awakening of the final guardian. The ocean glowed again. Desert sands rose in soft spirals. Forests shimmered with sparkles of light. Ice reflected beams like glowing mirrors. It was as if all the protectors were greeting the final one, completing a circle that had been broken for thousands of years. Meanwhile, the invaders were thrown into complete confusion. Their screens flickered. Their maps dissolved. Their navigation systems spun uselessly. They tried communicating with their ships, but everything was silent. They tried retreating, but even movement became difficult as the protectors' presence settled around the planet, like a peaceful shield. But the protectors never attacked. They didn't chase. They didn't threaten. They simply stood, glowing softly, showing a strength that needed no aggression. High in the sky, the final protector lifted its arm and reached toward the atmosphere. The sky responded immediately, filling with lines of shimmering light that stretched in every direction. These lines connected the protectors around the Earth, forming a protective web that wrapped around the entire planet. From space, the Earth glowed like a living jewel. People across the world watched in silent awe as the glow softened the air, warmed the winds, and filled the world with a strange feeling of harmony. Even animals sensed it. Birds gathered calmly in trees. Dogs stood still, ears lifted. Even restless animals in forests paused in a rare moment of quiet. The invaders finally understood they were not facing enemies. They were facing a world they had misunderstood. They had come believing Earth was weak, believing humans were easy to conquer, believing the planet was just another resource. But instead, they had awakened powers older than their own civilization. Pride turned into shock. Shock turned into fear, and fear turned into retreat. Their ships slowly drifted away, not forced, but simply unable to stay. Their energy systems no longer responded. Their confidence dissolved. They backed away from the glowing planet, unable to comprehend the ancient forces that stood guard over it. And humanity watched them go. Some people cried. Some hugged strangers. Many simply stood in place, unable to speak. It was not victory in a loud sense. It was a quiet victory, one earned through unity, patience, courage, and a deep connection to the world they lived on. The protectors, having done their part, remained for a while. They stood like silent giants across oceans, deserts, mountains, and forests. They didn't move aggressively. They simply watched, ensuring the invaders were truly gone. Once the sky cleared, once the last strange shadow disappeared into the darkness of space, the protectors slowly began to fade. Not vanish, not die, just fade gently, like mist dissolving into morning light. The ocean protector sank back into the water, leaving behind calm waves. The desert protector dissolved into sand that shimmered for a moment. The forest protector blended into the leaves and roots. The icy protector melted softly into snowflakes that drifted like feathers. And the final protector stepped back into the mountain, closing the stone behind it as if returning to a deep, peaceful sleep. People across the world watched them disappear with mixed emotions. They were grateful, relieved, and nostalgic all at once. It felt like saying goodbye to someone who had saved your life without asking for anything in return. After the protectors settled back into the earth, something beautiful happened. Communities began rebuilding, not with fear or competition, but with cooperation. People helped each other without waiting to be asked. They looked at their planet differently now, with more respect and love. It was like a new chapter was beginning, one where humans no longer felt alone or powerless. In classrooms, children drew pictures of glowing protectors rising from oceans and mountains. In towns, artists painted murals of the sky filled with beams of light. In cities, people planted trees and cleaned rivers, reminding themselves that Earth had protected them, and now it was their turn to protect it. Historians said the world had just witnessed a moment that would be remembered forever. Scientists admitted that the protectors were beyond anything science had ever imagined. Elders nodded and said that maybe humans had finally learned to listen to the stories. Nature had been whispering for centuries, and life continued. But it continued differently, better, brighter, more connected. People no longer saw the earth as something separate from themselves. They understood that the planet was alive in its own way, that it held secrets deeper than anyone realized, and that when humans stood together with kindness and courage, even the oldest forces of the world listened. The protectors slept again, silent beneath mountains, oceans, forests, deserts, and ice. But their presence was still felt like a heartbeat under the ground. Slow and steady, everyone understood one thing clearly. If the world was ever threatened again, if danger ever returned, if Earth ever needed them once more, the protectors would rise again, and humanity would rise with them.